I want to open this talk with an experience shared by a young mom in a Facebook group I'm in. She's given me permission to share it with you. This is what she wrote. So sick of the baby is the lesson. I get it. I do. But if I have to cancel one more field trip minutes before we're leaving because apple cider's dumped all over everyone and into the carpet, or because the couch just got decorated with purple marker, or I find 23 apples we picked the day before, each with one bite out of them and in a pile by my clueless 18-month-old, if I have to turn down one more, will you read to me, please? Or can we play a game request from my hungry-to-learn 4-year-old because I need to wipe poop from my child's back and belly and my kitchen wall? If I have to rush my 5-year-old through one more museum or orchard or nature walk that he's loving because my baby won't stop screaming and my toddler won't stop throwing temper tantrums on the ground, I am going to lose it. I know, this is a no-good vent. I'm sorry. But really, I find so much positive support and ideas in this group, but today, I just need lifted up. That's right. Right now, my brain is shut down to discussions on curriculum and implementation ideas. I just need to be reminded that they will get older. My poor preschooler, he's so ready to absorb everything. I'm sick of the baby years, and so I was going to say, and so is he. Well, as I was typing, my 4-month-old started crying, and because I just feel like crying myself right now, I ignored it, something I never do, like ever, and I continued to type. My 4-year-old looked up from his bristle blocks and said, "Mom, you're not responding to Paige. She's trying to communicate something to you. We don't ignore people in this family when they have something they need to say." I picked her up, thanked him for reminding me and for being her advocate, and sat down to nurse her. He got up and asked if I wanted a pillow and the laptop to finish what I was doing, and now was sitting next to me stroking Paige's hair with one hand and showing his 18-month-old brother the maps in his Bible with the other. Perhaps we are learning after all. I'm going to talk about the Story Resource Guide in the Forgotten Classics Family Library in this little session, but I wanted to start out with this experience because if you're a mom of young children, I have a feeling you related to it. And as I unfold the resources I'm going to share with you, I don't want you to think I've forgotten how busy and chaotic your days are sometimes. With my 9 children falling within an 11-year span, I remember well. It's important to keep in mind that in a heart-based education, the lessons aren't all in the books. The heart is being educated by life that's happening all around them. What I will be describing is actually just a small part of your day in the beginning. What I'm trying to say is, please don't feel overwhelmed by the resources I'm going to show you or think you need to incorporate them all today. Focus on some simple basics and it will unfold naturally, even on chaotic days. In fact, my hope is that after your children's hearts are sufficiently warmed and they're older, you can hand this guide to them and say, have at it. If your children are still young, it's just meant to give you some quick ideas for books to read or stories to tell or music to listen to. I remember an object lesson in a class years ago. The teacher put an empty jar on the table. Next to it was a pile of rocks and a cup of sand, and the object was to make it all fit in the jar. First, she filled the jar with the sand and then tried to add the rocks, but they didn't fit. So next, she put the rocks in first, and then the sand fit in all around it. I would like to suggest 4 rocks to build your day around. Goethe's the one that recommended them, and I referred to them in the Sandcastles talk. Every day, listen to some fine music, look at a masterpiece of fine art, recite a poem, and read a piece of fine literature, which I would translate into story. This is solid heart food. But maybe the image I should try and impress on your heart is not that of rocks, but of priceless sparkling gems. Diamonds and emeralds don't take up much room, but are of great worth and value. They last forever. Likewise, none of these 4 things require a lot of room in your day. If you accomplish nothing else in your day, know that you will have left a lasting impression on your child's heart of great worth. If your child goes to public school and you want to balance out with more hard activities at home, focus on these gems. One little story may seem small and insignificant, But over the course of 10 or so years, you will have planted nearly 4,000 stories in your child's heart, one day at a time. 4,000 stories that wouldn't be there if you didn't take those few minutes to share it. Add to these 4 gems the lasting impression of being snuggled in your arms and listening to your voice, of knowing you care, and you've given your child the whole apple of a heart-based early education. Most everything else is just sand. Because the story resource guide will mean more to your heart than to your head, I'd like to unfold it to you through a story. I'll warn you, I'm getting personal here, and if that's uncomfortable, please forgive me. I just don't know how else to tell you what I'm going to tell you. I'm hoping if you see how it unfolded to me, you'll see how better all the pieces fit together. Several years ago, I had a strong impression to create a small library of books for children and call it Libraries of Hope. I had no idea where to begin and thought it was a bit presumptuous to think that I could even begin to select books for someone else. I had no special credentials. I knew nothing about publishing books and had never even heard of books in the public domain. But I began searching. And while I searched, I felt like I should start with the Bible, to create a reader for children of many of the Bible stories, but keeping them in the King James Version language. I felt the pages should look simple and clean, to use a large font and keep spaces around the words so it didn't look cluttered or imposing. The sections were meant to be short, with a chapter heading describing the story within that section. My husband, who's the brain and technical wizard, joined me and learned about formatting and publishing. As I read the stories that now were laid out in a narrative flow, the question came to my mind: what are they telling you? And 2 lessons came immediately to me. With God, all things are possible, and righteousness exalteth a nation. And I felt an assurance that that was correct. Along the way, I felt to place verses of Scripture throughout the text that weren't necessarily part of the story. When the book was all done, I had a feeling to pay attention to the bookend Scriptures, the one I had felt to place at the beginning and the one I'd placed at the end. The first one was from Romans. The Spirit itself beareth witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. The last one came from Psalm. I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. And in my heart I felt the spirit of a loving Heavenly Father who wants his children to know that truth, first and last, that each of us has divine worth, and he wants us to know all things are possible with him, and that the problems of our world can be corrected with personal righteousness. I've been surprised of how this simple format has drawn people into the Bible who never had a desire to read it before. I got a call from a mom not long ago late at night who was so excited to tell me that her 21-year-old son, who had no religious inclinations, was drawn to this Bible and had started reading it with her. I had another young woman tell me that her non-religious father was peeking over her shoulder while she read it on a plane ride and soon said, I think I'd like to read that too. I watched a little granddaughter who was just starting to learn how to read curl up in bed with it. I found her crying one night. What's the matter? I asked her. And she said she'd just read about Cain and Abel and couldn't understand how a brother could be so mean. She wasn't just reading words. She felt the story. The Bible was the only book in many of the homes of our young America, and from it, children learned to read at a very early age. Maybe it was because so many of the words were short and repeated often enough to become familiar. Maybe it was because it was read aloud so often that they recognized the words when they saw them. Most importantly, maybe it's because in those early years, children felt its spirit and were drawn to it. The Story Bible is not meant to replace the Bible. It's simply a heartwarmer. Now I felt to move on to a new project and that I should start looking for books about American history and call it the Freedom Series, that it should consist of 12 books, collections of stories, and that all the titles should include the word stories. At that time, I wasn't even sure what a story was. I felt I should look for a simple narrative first and then include some kind of original source material, such as letters or diaries or quotes or personal recollections. I soon discovered public domain books written before 1923 and scanned through hundreds and eventually thousands of them. I compared and searched out information on the writers, but the final selection always came down to a feeling. There were several times when we were ready to take the book to the printer, and I'd had to tell my poor husband, who had spent so many hours formatting it, that it just wasn't right, that something was missing, or that the book just wasn't the right one, and we'd have to scrap it while I went back to search until I felt satisfied that it was the right book. There were so many wonderful books I couldn't publish, and the thought came to create a separate online library in connection with each book we published so that a child could gain a broader vision and a deeper understanding over time. I started to get a sense of why there were 12 books. It was so a foundation of learning could be laid upon a yearly rotation so that the learning could come line upon line, a little here and a little there. When the series was completed, the books covered American history from the time of Christopher Columbus and exploration to just after World War I. I had a copy of Cleon Skousen's 5,000-Year Leap on my desk next to my computer. I meant to read it, but I hadn't had time. I generally knew what it was about, that the author had researched the writings of the American founders looking for the principles of liberty. He had identified 28 principles. When the Freedom series was finished, I was sitting at my desk and happened to glance at the book when a question came to my mind. Did you know all 28 principles are in those books? And I said, really? As I looked at each principle, I thought, well, I learned that one in this story and that one in that story. And I realized that the writers had woven all the principles into their stories. And that became the true value of the books. It wasn't just the stories they contained, but that the stories taught principles of freedom, which shouldn't surprise me. The writers didn't hide the fact that they were writing to the children to teach them how to hold on to the republic and their hard-earned freedom. They wanted them to feel the solemn responsibility placed on their shoulders and entrusted to their care. I felt further pressed. What lessons of liberty had I learned from the readings? I started writing them down, and the feeling came, can you narrow it down more? And as I grouped the lessons, they soon all fell within just 3. Faith in a higher power, virtue, that the more righteous a people are, the higher level of liberty they are capable of maintaining, and patriotism, which is a love of country, and comes from a knowledge of who we are, and which binds hearts together in unity. In fewer words, it comes down to faith, hope, and charity. Remove any one of them, and we lose our freedom. Yet it's these 3 elements that have been completely removed from our textbooks and modern history books. Now the challenge was, how do you get children who are plugged into video games and entertainment interested in stories about history? As I searched for that answer, I came to truly understand the power of stories and storytelling. In trying to figure out how to interest children in reading books like this, I had an image come to my mind of trying to start a campfire by plopping a big log in the fire pit and attempting to light it with a match. I knew that you can't start a fire that way. You have to start with the kindling. It seemed that the Freedom series was more of a log for children 8 and older, but I needed to create a series of books to provide the kindling to get the fire burning in children under the age of 8. And so the Story Hour series was born. I learned how important nursery rhymes and poetry were for developing a taste of language, and Stories and Rhymes for Young Children was created along with its online library of additional books of poetry and rhyme, as well as simple stories of family and familiar things to start training the habit of attention and sustaining thought. I came to understand how important fairy tales and mythology are in increasing the child's capacity to turn words into moving images and attach them to feelings so that the heart can understand. I looked for stories from around the world and sorted them by such in the online libraries. The published books became samplers. And even more importantly, I came to understand that fairy tales are the means by which concepts of right and wrong, justice and injustice, good and evil, can be delivered in a way a child's heart can understand. The children need a basic understanding of these concepts before they can start to learn the lessons of history. I looked for stories of epic and legendary heroes to start inspiring their hearts, as well as stories to familiarize the stories of great literature from Shakespeare, Cervantes, Dante, Chaucer, and Homer. I included more stories from the Bible and stories to start introducing the stories of history and biographies to children as they near the age of 8, as well as stories of nature, and I attached online libraries to all of them. All of these stories were meant to be kindling in preparation for a more serious study to follow. Now I felt impressed to add another series, the World History series, because a child cannot gain a true understanding of America's place in the world without a background of what was going on in the rest of the world before America came around. We can teach our children the mechanics of the Constitution, but if they haven't seen what life looks like without freedom, if they haven't seen the struggle for liberty that's been going on for thousands of years, they can easily be persuaded to fall back into the traps of tyranny and oppression that have been going on since the beginning of recorded history. We've all heard the saying, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. The good news is, this is the first time in all recorded history we have a generation of young people who actually can know history. Who else has had access to the records and lessons that we have? I believe the greatest gift the storytellers of the golden age of literature left us is the history they wrote for children's hearts. The stream is purest nearest its source, and these scholars didn't have the thousands of diluted histories to write from. They studied the original sources, and then, for the first time ever, filtered it through their warm and understanding hearts and told it in a way that even children could understand. I don't even see publishers publishing world history today for children other than textbooks which don't communicate with their hearts. I guess there's just no money in it for publishers. Today, the best of the best for children is available for free in history study. If we can manage to warm our children's hearts up so they want to study the lessons of history, maybe we finally won't be doomed to repeat it. The treasure trove of history stories you'll find in the Forgotten Classics Family Library has been buried until just the last 5 to 10 years. We live in an incredibly exciting day of possibilities. I felt that each nation's story needed to be told, one at a time, for the patterns to be revealed and the lessons to be learned. So I looked for books that would give a basic overview of a nation's story to lay a foundation for further learning. By studying each nation one at a time, the lessons begin to overlap. A child learns of Holland's struggle against Spain and then reads Spain's side of the story. He reads England's fight against Scotland and then reads Scotland's side of the story. And in the process, a child starts gaining perspective and an understanding heart. Too often we give our children the costumes and the props and maybe a cast of characters, but they never get to see the play played out. I wanted them to see the play. I felt that each story of the nation should connect to the stories in the Freedom series to start weaving everything together. So after a child learns the story of Columbus, maybe the next year or the year after in the rotation, that month he'll read about the story of China or India, because that's where Columbus was trying to get to. Children will learn about France with Lafayette, Germany and Russia with World War I, and so forth. Each year as the child returns, he brings greater reading comprehension and more ideas to his reading, and the understanding begins to deepen. And as with the other series, I found many books to organize in the online libraries for further study. The most common way I see to study history today among homeschoolers is to break it down into a 4 or a 6-year rotating schedule, studying ancient history one year, Middle Ages the next, Renaissance and Reformation the next, and finally modern history. I have a couple of issues with that. For one thing, 4 or 6 years to a child is a very long time. When he returns, chances are he's not going to remember a lot of what he learned so long ago. Also, the lessons are more likely to be photographic still shots rather than moving images. Plus, the difference in learning comprehension between a child of 6 and a child of 10 is night and day. A child who learns about Greece and Rome at age 6 and then again at age 10 or 11 is going to not have the same experience as the child who is first introduced at age 10 and again at 15 or 16. Another problem is American history is left to the very end. I believe American children should have a steady stream of stories about their own country. Finally, information tends to be fire hosed because you're not going to be back there for 4 or 6 more years. By allowing for a 12-month rotating schedule, there's no worries about missing something because you're going to be back again in a year. Understanding is then able to be layered in gradually and steadily and is given a chance to soak in deeply. You'll find a suggested layout of the rotating schedule in the front of the resource guide. And now I had another impression come to me. One day while I was looking at a painting, I noticed that I stepped back to take in the whole image, but then there were details I wanted to look at more closely, so I had to step in closely. The same thing happens when I look at photographs online. I zoom out when I want to take in the whole image, but I zoom in when there are details I want to look at. And the thought came to me that learning about history follows the same pattern. Just like zooming in and out on digital images, learning about history has a lot of zooming out to take in the whole and then zooming in to study details. History is a study of people's hearts. So now the idea came to add in a series about great lives, so that as students bump into interesting people along the way, they can zoom in and take a closer look. Or by reading about an interesting person, they'll now want to zoom out and see how that person fits into the whole picture. As I gathered these stories of great musicians, writers, scientists, humanitarians, artists, and great leaders, they have inspired my heart and lifted me up. When I'm discouraged, one of them will come to my mind who faced much harder things than me and helped me put things into perspective. I find myself wanting to be more like them. Through their stories, I feel surrounded by the diamond souls of history. As your children spend time with them, they will feel the same. The library was now almost complete, but not quite. Now came the feeling to lead children to nature, God's university, where He teaches one-on-one without words. And the nature series took shape, as well as the additional books to open hearts to fine art and music and be taught there as well. It was at this point that I went through the fine art at the Art Renewal Center and put together the Pinterest pages so you could easily find art that will teach your children's hearts. And I started linking videos of music to give you a place to start in your busy day if you're looking for ideas of music for your children to listen to. I knew what was in all these books and resources, but how could I begin to point you in a direction? It was like being faced with a giant 5,000-piece puzzle, and the puzzle pieces are everywhere. Well, the first thing you do to put together a puzzle is you take the edge pieces and you create a framework to work within. And so that became the idea behind the Story Resource Guide. It's meant to provide a framework to start fitting in all the puzzle pieces. And it also gave me the solution of how to work in another important piece, which is the great literature of the world. I started looking for the most loved titles and attaching them to the study of the nations. For instance, the month you're studying about France is a good time to read Tale of Two Cities or Les Miserables, or when you're studying Russia to read War and Peace or other Tolstoy writings, and so forth. I hope as you look at the guide it will make sense. As I said, one of the purposes of the guide is to help you find what you might be looking for in the Forgotten Classics Family Library, which, of course, you know by now is on the Well-Educated Heart page on our website. There are currently over 2,000 books in this library, all from the pre-1923 golden age of children's literature. Just like the library, the books are organized in different library rooms. If you go into the Story Hour series library, you're going to find books especially for children 8 and under. If you go in the Freedom Series library, all the books have to do with American history. The World History Library has, of course, books about all the countries of the world, and the Great Lives Library has biographies, and the Resource Library is a catch-all for books and resources that don't fit in the other library rooms. If you're looking for books that have to do with nature, art, or music, you'll likely find them in the Nature, Art, and Music Library room, unless you're looking specifically for children under the age of 7 or 8, in which case I'd send you to the Story Hour library. If you go into one of the libraries, you'll see 12 images of the covers of the books we publish within that particular series. Each of them is numbered, and each book has an online library connected to it, as I've already described to you. In the guide, you'll see references such as F6 or S3. The letter tells you which series to go to. F is for Freedom Series, S is for Story Hour Series, and so forth. The number immediately following the letter tells you which library to now go to. For example, F6 takes you to the online library associated with book number 6, Stories of the Government in the Freedom Series. If there is a dash and another number, that alerts you that that particular selection is in one of the books we publish and tells you what page you can find that story on. As you start using it, I think it will make a lot more sense. You'll notice there's a quick reference guide at the beginning of the story guide. If you're not familiar with Internet Archives, it's a project similar to Gutenberg that's scanning and digitalizing books and placing them online. Most of the books in our online library are linked to books in Internet Archives. In Internet Archives, you can read the actual book. You can even turn the pages like a book. It has all the original illustrations. You can make the pages larger for ease in reading. In the left-hand column, you'll notice some additional options. You can download the book to your Kindle or other e-reader, or there's a PDF option to print the book out. I found I can print out most books for $3 to $5 on our laser printer at home, which is a great feature for those of you who like to read hard copies and underline and take notes. I just 3-hole punch them and put them in notebooks. The access to knowledge that organizations like Internet Archives is offering the world is nothing short of miraculous. It's a portable library you can take anywhere. If you open the guide, you'll see it organized into 3 columns. The left column will give you suggestions of stories and books found in our Forgotten Classics family library, both in the books we have printed and the books in the online library. Did I mention the books in the online library are all available for free? There's absolutely no charge to access that. In the middle column, I listed books that have been proven favorites over many years. This includes classic picture books. Many of these recommendations can be found in libraries or on Amazon. You'll also see suggestions for music and classic literature. Most of the classic literature I list can be found in the online library in the resource section. The third column is reserved for movies, especially historical movies. I'd never use these as an introduction, but they work really nicely to deepen the visual impression of the history they're learning in their reading. Without the historical background, a lot of the movies probably won't make any sense to them. I suggest using imdb.com to check reviews and details about the movie, as well as parental advisories. Most of them are family-friendly. Some movies are definitely better than others, and some movies may not appeal at one age, but will be very enjoyable 2 or 3 years later. So don't force them. Maybe you'll only watch part of one for the visual impression. Many of the movies were filmed on location, so it gives an accurate image of setting. The good news is many of them are available for free watching on Amazon Prime, so if you start a movie and it's not a hit, just come back another time. Please keep in mind, this is not meant to be a strict schedule. It's only a menu of possibilities. If all your children are under 8, look for children's classic recommendations that work wonderfully for family read-alouds. Children's listening comprehension far exceeds their reading comprehension. Start introducing them to classical music and musicals. Read from the fairy tales. And start reading the short stories from history and about great lives as they get closer to 8. Children under 8 will probably spend more time in nature stories in the Story Hour series. If you've started reading the Freedom series, it doesn't mean you have to wait to enjoy selections from the World History List. Everything is self-contained, meaning whatever you choose isn't dependent on having studied something else beforehand. When you're training the mind, concepts need to be presented in an orderly manner. But the heart stores individual pieces and then starts fitting them all together over time. You'll find books in the World History online libraries that even young children under 8 will enjoy. You know your child best. The best I can say is familiarize yourself with what's there, and you've got a long time to do that. You'll increase your reading attention time with your children as you find ways to keep their hands busy while they're listening. Let them color, put together puzzles, build with Legos, or teach them handicrafts. Creating beautiful and useful objects with the hands, it's also a satisfying part of a heart-based education. I included some old make-and-do books in the resource section of the library, and lest you think activities like knitting and crocheting are only for girls, check out the success of the Knitting Project in Baltimore's prison system. I've linked the story in the links and resources section. Now the thought came to me, you need to think of a way to help organize and hold on to what they're learning, and the ideas found in the notebook section started coming to me. And then the thought came to me that it would be wonderful to find a way for families to come together and for children to interact with other children who are learning the same kinds of things, and the ideas for story clubs came to life. And then, finally, the impression came to me to freely share all the things I've been learning about educating hearts, and these little talks resulted. The last several years have been quite a journey for me. This story isn't over, but I believe the next chapters are meant to be written by you, with God's help. I was only asked to open a door to an idea and to provide some resources. Several times I've tried to take it a step further and suggest particular ways to use this, to put together a detailed curriculum, if you will, and I've always been stopped. I've come to accept that it's because God reserves the next step for himself. If I have said something to open your heart, if I've taught you principles and rules and given you resources that ring true to you, then please trust the last step is where he will customize the course of study and direct you personally. I hope you'll feel comfortable sharing the ideas and lessons you will be learning as you apply heart-based principles on our Facebook group page. We're not left alone to figure out how to reach our children's hearts. I know other mothers learn this lesson in their own way. For me, the lesson came many years ago when our little 6-week-old Michael contracted meningitis. I felt so helpless watching his little body stretched out on the icy sheet as nurses worked to bring the fever down, the little Dixie cup taped to his head to protect the IV tube. I'd gone home to shower and change my clothes, and as I drove back to the hospital, my tearful pleading intensified. Please, God, make him well. Don't let him die. I love him so much. I know I've only had him 6 weeks, but I can't imagine life without him. It was a gray, dreary, rainy morning, and as I pulled up to a red light, the windshield wipers swishing back and forth, I cried even louder, "Please, please don't take my son away from me." In the moments of silence that followed came the life-changing lesson to my soul. It was as though unseen hands had grabbed me firmly by the shoulders to get my attention, and the words formed clearly in my mind. "Marlene, he was my son before he was your son. Don't you think I care?" In that moment, a vague concept turned into a clear reality as I felt deeply in my heart the shared interest we had in the fate of that little boy. I had loved Michael for 6 weeks. God had already spent an eternity with him. From that moment, I have never felt alone in this often crazy yet wonderful world of parenting. Rather, it has been a very real partnership. There continue to be joys and sorrows, but I have found his grace more than compensates for my shortcomings. He wants me to succeed, and he wants you to succeed. These are his children too, and that is the source of hope for all parents, that we're not alone, that someone much wiser who loves our children even more than we do stands ready to help if we let him. It's okay if you don't know everything. He does, and he's anxious to teach you. By the way, our little Michael is now 6'3" and a true joy of our lives. Although I don't know exactly what the next chapters look like in this continuing story of educating hearts, I do know how the story ends. I've read the final chapter. As I've said before, a new world is coming where swords will be beaten into plowshares and lions will lie down with lambs. People's hearts will be changed. Love, truth, and beauty will be the ruling power. How we get from here to there, only God knows. But he's given us clues. I'll share one of those clues with you before I close. I woke up one morning and the thought was on my mind, read the book of Enoch. I immediately responded, is there a book of Enoch? I can now tell you there certainly is. It's in the Apocrypha and I found it online. I read to the very end where Enoch sees our day in vision. And these are the words I read. To the righteous and the wise shall be given books of joy, of integrity, and of great wisdom. To them shall books be given in which they will rejoice and acquire the knowledge of every upright path. Does that not describe our day? In the paraphrased words of Joshua, all I can say is, set your heart right and expect wonders.